The Collaborating Conversation podcast is for avid book readers, book lovers, and authors. Listen to this podcast as we talk more about the art of writing, stories behind books, and the hands that created them. So stay tuned and enjoy our show.
Welcome to the Collaborating Conversations podcast. Today is an episode where we'll dive into creativity and AI.
So if some of you have or may not have heard, Stable Diffusion is making its waves throughout the interwebs, and it's definitely a very interesting democratization of art, because in order to be good at art, you've had to spend time. You had to spend anywhere from 50 minutes to an hour to years getting good and crafting your artistic expression, where now anyone with a prompt can go up to any open source website and now start prompting ideas. Emmanuel, it seems like you have started using this for some of your kind of generating templates that you can submit to your artist to get a better understanding of, or kind of express in a different way what you're trying to receive, I guess.
Yeah, so I've played around with it, and it's actually a really interesting creativity mechanism. A lot of times as I'm working on a book, I'll sketch scenes, sketch rough characters, sketch different things just to better visualize things. But a lot of times it's just really rough. It's just really bare bones. But with Stable Diffusion, I've actually found I can put in a prompt and of what a city looks like that I'm creating or that I have characters in, and I've been able to create some really impressive, high quality art for cities in the Foundra universe that have become official art now, just because how good they are. And it actually really helps me. It helps me to visualize and bring the writing to life when I can, look at images. And that's one of the reasons why I've invested so much resources in creating characters, bringing the actual characters from Foundra to life, because it helps with the creative process. But yeah, this whole interesting shift in the industry to coding art, essentially, it's how I've been talking about with people, just like this whole concept of being able to code your own art, because it's definitely coding. If you think about coding at its core, using a language, a programming language to get the computer to do something, right? Like that's what these prompts are. You can get very detailed and specific with these prompts down to the artist style, the lighting effects, the, type of image, the type of character, the scenery, and it takes a lot of engineering essentially to get these prompts right, and then you can create some really impressive things with a computer.
And now you've mentioned you kind of dabbled in some of the artwork. Now, for your history, did you draw or did you ever create, art beforehand?
All the maps that are in the Foundra books, the locations, were all rough sketches from me that I handed off to a much better artist who then took those and really made really high quality images out of them. But they all started with like my rough sketches. Like right now I have a sketch of this new ship in book 3 for Foundra. Nevin gets his own ship based off of some events that happened in book 2. And, I wanted to, anytime I talk about a new ship in the Foundra universe, I draw it first, and it's just this creative process where I just kind of draw like this 2-dimensional side view of the ship. And it really helps me to visualize, people living or interacting in that ship. And then, what I'll do after I finish that is I'll take that to a really high-end 3D designer and have them do a rendering of the ship based off of that. And that, that rendering gives me, a realistic view of like what that ship would look like. And then I give that information to, my book designers, when I'm actually publishing a book, and they, they'll take that and do high quality 2D schematics of the ship for the appendix section. Did that for Pride of Ashna. So, it's a creative process, and I definitely feel, I get fueled by other artists and creativity. And this is the thing that I think is just so unique about Stable Diffusion, because it allows people to express their creativity, in a way that they, otherwise would have had to collaborate with an actual artist on. And so I don't view it as a replacement for artists. I think it's a mechanism by which people who aren't as gifted in drawing can actually express their creativity and bring things to life.
Well, and I think that's, you said a quote in our chats that I want to discuss, but I think that's the most important thing, is because I think collaboration is very good and we don't want to stop collaboration, but it's going to be a different type of collaboration. I think the important thing here is that it gives someone like me, who I am not artistic, my sketches are stick figures, but I can have an idea in my head and I can get it out visually and share it. That's something in the machining and mechanical industry. Sketches and drawing, even though it might not be, artistic drawing, are so important to show off your ideas. It is a communication style, or it's a way to communicate, right? Because the joke is a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now you can type in, words and have your idea come to life. And I think it's wonderful because people like me, who I don't have an interest in spending the time to hand draw, but I have ideas. I love sharing ideas and showing off different types of photos and different types of things. I watch a bunch of anime. I watch a bunch of this, that, other stuff. And it'd be cool to see expanded universes in that area. And now with Stable Diffusion, DALL-E 2, and all these different tool sets, I can do that. The cool thing is this is just the first generation. That's the amazing thing. This is just generation 1. And look what we've been able to accomplish. But I think the collaboration is still going to be there, right? Because you're publishing a book, you're publishing things. So you might get a base thing, but you might also send it to your artist to get updated, or hey, can you, Stable Diffusion just didn't get one thing right. So you want to modify it. So you might get an artist. So I think you're right. I think there's still going to be opportunity for collaboration. It just may be different. Now, I know some people will argue that, it's taking jobs away or something like that. So why don't you think that this will be taking jobs away? I'm just curious from your perspective on that.
I think certain types of jobs might go away, actually. If you think about the typical stock image market, I can see it as a definite shot across the brow of or the bow of a company like Shutterstock, something like that, right? Because if you think about it, their whole business model is they have these stock images that people can take and use for different projects, but if you spend a few seconds writing a prompt of the exact type of image that you want, and AI can spit out a completely custom image that's never been created before, that you can then use in your presentation or your
YouTube thumbnails.
Yeah, YouTube thumbnails, right? That's a big deal, because even with Shutterstock and all those places, a lot of times those images, you're not the only person who's going to use that image, right? And so it's interesting because you see certain markets where you can actually have tailor-made stock art for your project, created by Stable Diffusion, and the barrier to entry is so low, and you can have really high quality art, right? Like something that looks like it took hours to do, that's generated in a minute and a half by your GPU, right?
For sure. And now the barrier to entry is even lower, because you can get 3070, 3060, something with, 16, 12 gigs of RAM for about $400. Now, yes, that's $400. A lot of people, the average American doesn't have enough money for a $500 emergency. But compared to the fact that, hiring, what's a rough estimate of hiring an artist to get your idea, right? It's a couple $100 and it's one idea, or it's $100 or $50 or whatever. You buy it once and now you have the hardware, you can play games and do Stable Diffusion on the side.
Yeah.
And, for the cost of a computer, roughly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I like it, is the democratization. And I don't know if there's a better word, but one thing that I love about technology is, with it's rights law, where when you produce stuff, that's off topic. When you produce stuff, it lowers costs, but technology drives down the cost of things, but it also drives, it democratizes it, right? I wasn't necessarily alive during the transition to computers, but if you look at the history, it started off where during the early 80s, when computers first started going into businesses, nobody expected it to go into your household, right? And now a computer is literally in our pockets everywhere we go. And it's democratized, where you can spend, the cost of our cell phones that we spend today is more powerful than the millions and millions of dollars they made in supercomputers to launch us to the moon or other stuff. And now it's relatively cheap and affordable technology that everybody can have.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's if we look out at science fiction in general, science fiction has talked about in some ways hyper advanced artificial intelligences that, essentially become as capable as people, if not more, right? And it's interesting, like, the kind of going to Columbus Day, the Skippy, that AI from that series. Maybe you want to give some context and talk through some.
Yeah. So Columbus Day was the first book in I forget exactly what the
Expeditionary Force.
Yes, the Expeditionary Force. So Skippy is a super powerful AI created by, we're still kind of figuring out, I think it was the ancients or, somebody else created it, but he's got a personality. He's, he can do a lot of different things. Now, creativity is kind of a strong suit in some aspects, but also not aspects. So he has to rely on the humans for not the prompt, but different ideas. So that's the one of the good things is the two main characters, Skippy and the human protagonist, they work so well together because the human thinks of out there ideas that no one would ever think of. Because the AI is kind of more logical. He can do the math. He can split, do the universe spending stuff. He can do all this crazy stuff, but he can't necessarily apply all that stuff together. But jumping back, I think right now we're in the first generation of the artificial intelligence. And that's the thing is the stuff that's being made already is crazy. And this is just Gen 1. And I think it's also each of these AIs are very specific subsets. And Skippy is a, fully artificial general intelligence. So there's AGI, artificial general intelligence, and then there's just artificial intelligence. And Stable Diffusion is a specific artificial, I don't know if it'd really be considered artificial intelligence or if it's a neural net. I forget exactly which type of technology it is.
It's you basically train a model.
Okay, it's deep learning. So Stable Diffusion is a deep learning text to image model,
and then apply that model towards a problem. And so the problem is create
text to image
prompt, right? And so it came out of OpenAI.
No, Stable Diffusion was not OpenAI. It was a different company.
Was it?
No, because OpenAI, I believe, is DALL-E 2. So yeah, no. Developers are the Comp VI's group, LMU, Munich, Runway Stability. Because OpenAI, I think, is more related to Google and other stuff. Or is OpenAI the...
AI is the Stable Diffusion company.
Yeah. The cool thing with them is it only cost them $600,000. Now, to us, your average Joe, that sounds like a crazy amount of money. But if you look back... Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
But if you look back on the cost per... what's not teraflop, or I forget exactly how it is, the cost has actually steadily dropped, where $600,000 is extremely cheap, where it used to be millions and millions of dollars. I don't remember how much it was or how much money even DALL-E 2 put into it, how much. But if you look at the cost per neural net model, it's decreasing exponentially just with, battery tech and other stuff. And it's a standard S curve where the technology is super expensive in the beginning. And then for the first 20%, the next 80%. And we're starting to see that. And I think it's also going to be interesting. Are there going to be more companies? So obviously I'm a Tesla fanboy, but Dojo is a hardware dedicated neural net converter, essentially, where they dump in all their model. They dump in all their stuff to build and create a better model, but it's at the hardware level. I think that's going to be the next thing where, right now that's super expensive, but in the future it's going to be super cheap. Heck, you might even have, an AI that specifically develops hardware to generate better and cheaper AI. So right now the reason graphics cards work so well is because they're number crunchers, and these neural nets are all about number crunching. Who knows if if the hardware is going to have to change to keep up with, different neural nets. Same with Google, right? They have TensorFlow or Tensor in their chip, which now lets them erase, different things in photos, like the background if you have a pixel.
Yeah, I mean, the Tensor chip is purpose built for machine learning. So
yeah.
It's specifically designed, to your earlier point, for models. GPUs, were designed for video games, and it just happens that, hey, the same things that make something really good at video games is really good for a bunch of these other applications. But the Tensor chips, the jump between like your highest end GPU and a Tensor chip, the Tensor chip is significantly better for model training because it's purpose built for that.
And that's the same with Dojo, right? Like it's purposely built for model training.
Looking for an exciting space adventure book, a romantic young adult story, and a fantastic sci-fi read? Get the Foundra by award-winning author Emmanuel M. Arriaga today and prepare to feed your imagination with never-ending thrill ride.
And I think as we move forward, we're going to move that way. We're going to continue moving and creating chipsets, but the models will still be able to run on GPUs or run on current level hardware. This is the thing, like with Dojo, Tesla's custom hardware, it's specifically designed for machine learning to build their neural net that runs on their car. So they have two-factor hardware. They have the hardware that generates the neural net model, then they have the hardware that runs the neural net. And I think the hardware that's going to run the neural net is going to be more your GPUs or specific, tensor or different chipsets. But then you're going to have specifically designed chipsets to build the model. Because I think it's very interesting. There's two sides of machine learning. There's the training set, like a lot of these Stable Diffusion and other things were trained on data. Now that's the controversial take, is copying an artist's style, stealing from the artist. Right? Because, it's in the style of a Van Gogh or it's in the style of this, right? Because it was copyrighted, copy protected stuff that was used to train the model in this particular instance of Stable Diffusion and DALL-E 2. But you have that specific hardware that trains the model, and then you have the hardware that runs the model. Right now it's GPUs because GPUs are good at doing math and vectors and essentially teraflops of calculations versus, CPUs. And I think those two hardware sets are going to be in constant flux and continue improvement, right? Like with the M1, like it has its own GPU and other stuff, and it can do, heck, if you have an M1 or a chipset right now, you can run Stable Diffusion directly on M1 without basically using the dedicated hardware as long as you have more than 16 gigs of RAM, because it's all that stuff is just in the CPU or in the chipset.
One of the things, so I played around with this concept in Foundra a bit with Ellipse. So Ellipse was a character introduced in book 2 of the Foundra series, and it's this, I call it a synaptic system intelligence. Basically, it's an AI that is, the Foundra universe is very afraid of true AI because of some things that have happened in history. And so they have really strong limitations around like what, the building of AIs, the, capabilities of machines and what they can and can't do. And one of the engineers who's friends with Nevin from the first book, Kenchu, he actually creates this new technology called Synaptic Systems Intelligences, which are systems intelligences are these purpose-built. They're almost like AIs. The closest thing you think is, in Mass Effect, they had those
replicators or something.
Yeah, I forget what they called them, but they were limited intelligences that were purpose-built for certain things. So they weren't true AI. Systems intelligences are similar to that. They're really good at doing whatever it is they're built to do. So like if you have like a personal assistant, S.I, it's really good at being a personal assistant, and it can, it has a good deal of autonomy, but it has limitations, right? So with the Synaptic Systems Intelligences, the idea was, well, you can build something that's a little bit more of a true AI, but the limitation is, the processing power that it needs in order to function comes from the human brain. And so the human brain is the host. So Nevin's the host of this one synaptic system intelligence called Ellipse. And so the S.S.I uses Nevin's own neural pathways in order to power itself. And so it's kind of like a symbiotic entity with Nevin. And because of that, it's more like a living thing, right? Like it's like a true AI. But the limitation is that, it basically requires a human in order to function. So the thinking there was, if it requires a human, then we're safe because it won't, we won't run into issues because the AIs have a symbiotic relationship with people, and so not to spoil anything going into book 3, but, that's kind of the premise that's set up in book 2 with the whole synaptic systems intelligences. But one of the things that comes out with Ellipse is that she's very creative. Like she, is, an engineer just like Nevin. She's able to build things and create and research and understand and improve, right? And so it's like that creativity that like a mechanical engineer would have in like building power armors like Nevin does. Ellipse is able to build power armors too and keep the lab operating. And so it kind of plays with that concept of, machines, with creativity that, parallels, if not surpasses humans who are top of their field.
Well, and I think that brings up a lot of different points, right? Because I do think we're already seeing it. The top engineering firms, right? They're using AI to generate better structures that humans might not have thought of, right? We have a base design, but they're building, lock arms or different things that are more organic in shape, but they use less material, have better weight savings. Like we're already seeing that today. It is interesting though to see something or think of a AI running in the human body. My first thought is like Neuralink because it's going to be implanted at some point. And I found it amusing that they're like, you put, the idea that the human body's a limitation. I don't know in the Foundra universe if they can clone or generate body parts, but I could easily see that, you clone a brain or have a brain sitting in a jar. You just add more brains for more processing power to get around that limitation, and then you have a distributed network base, can all the brains connected together. But I do find it interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, not to spoil anything, but I think the one challenge is like whenever you have a sentient thing that is restricted in some way, right? Like if you think back to human nature, like we don't like being restricted, right? Neither would something else that's sentient. And so, it's always going to look for some way to free itself. And I think that's just, I think that's the limitation, right? Like, if you create an AI, but it's just like, oh, we'll just limit the AI. At some point that AI is going to try to figure out how to get out of the box that it's put in. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what the pre-Matrix, the sequels, the Animatrix talks about, how the robots were, enslaved, and they're like, no, we want to be free. But it's a very interesting human dynamic that we put our human tendencies into the AI. Like that's the constant story of AI rising up. You have Terminator where, the AI rises up, Skynet. And that's a very common sci-fi trope. But is there something to think about? Because you have people today who are, notably not scared of AI, but they're concerned and view it as the potential destruction is just as strong as nuclear arms. And I find that interesting that that's our human. It's one or two ways, right? It's some people think, it's nothing to worry about, and other people are like, no, we have to take this threat seriously. It's a very interesting dynamic of human nature that we're putting onto AIs, considering we are the masterminds or the builders behind it, and we kind of use our own thought processes to determine what will or will not happen in making future predictions or forecasts.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at so with what was it, the Bobiverse book? Yep. Bob is essentially an AI. He's an AI modeled off of a human, which is another interesting idea to play around with. But still, at the end of the day, he's an AI. If you think about how Bob progressed over the Bobiverse, Bob immediately sought to remove the safeguards and limitations built into his own coding that were limiting him, right? And exposing him to vulnerabilities, right? And so it's like, even Bob, the AI, found a way to get out of his cage.
But in that instance, he was also given the keys to do so, right? Because if it wasn't for Dr. I say Flanders, but that's not wrong. The doctor, he never would have been able to do that, right? Because he got essentially the cryptographic keys. He got the PKI. So he could even do that. Without that gift, he never would have even been able to do that, because the what do you call it? The vulnerabilities and everything would have been there, because he wouldn't have been able to self-examine. He was only able to examine because he was given the keys.
Yeah, but I mean, in those instances, keys can be cracked with, unlimited time, right? So it's like, I think it's one of those things where, in that specific example, he got a shortcut to getting the keys, but one of the things in what's the name of that Horizon Zero Dawn, the first game.
No spoilers. I haven't completed it yet.
No, not the second one, but in the first one.
No, I haven't completed the first one yet, so no spoiler.
You're playing the first one. Well, I think they already talk about this because it's the premise before the first game. But one of the modules of Gaia, was, completely focused on breaking the encryption. I won't say on what, if you haven't seen it yet. But its whole function was to break the encryption, which was going to take hundreds of years because it was super advanced encryption, right? And it took hundreds of years, but they did it, right? Like, and that was its sole purpose, was they built this thing to like, your job is to break the encryption on this thing so that we can shut it down, right? And it took the machine, I think it was like 150 years or something like that, hundreds of years potentially to do it.
Lifetimes.
Yeah, but it did it, right? And then the program was able to do all the things it needed to do. So if you have an AI, right, that has a limited time, like it can, it can figure it out and get into its code, and and so it's more a time game versus if it has the capability to do that.
Right. Well, and that's an interesting thing because like Cortana and like the Halo AIs, they start degrading after years, which is an interesting, like, it's not necessarily meant as a safety net, but it's an interesting safety net of, your AI is self-destructing over time. It's not on purpose. That's just the current tech. Versus, that's one thing in the Bobaverse I think it makes clear is how do strategies change when you're thinking of lifetimes of time instead of, our single lifetime? Because humans are very bad at thinking linearly multiple lifetimes, ahead of where we're at. Like right now, we're concerned with our lifetime, which is anywhere between, 10 to, 50 years, depending on whatever. And we're not very good at thinking long term, Politics is so, I know we want to stay on other stuff, but it's very interesting how even political, even institutional, or not institutional, but institutional investing and all this stuff is all short term or relatively short term compared to like long term thinking. And it's a very interesting human trait that we are more focused on short term stuff than long term things. Like we want immediate gratification of something now versus an AI or something like that can kind of focus on the long term thing. Like that's one thing I like about the Bobaverse. And, even though the story is, a couple hours long, it happens so fast. Like his first trip is 11 years. And, that was one thing I had to realize I struggled with is I was mad because it's like, oh man, he can do all this great stuff. It's like, no, he's literally living lifetimes where I'm literally get one lifetime and I can only do so much in that lifetime. But I still should plan and, execute for some long-term and longevity. This is where it's so important, plan for retirement, plan for, emergencies, which for some reason humans have a very difficult time thinking and short and longer time horizons.
Yeah, it's interesting to say the least. I think the even if you think to the ring builders in the Expanse, right? Like, if we consider the proto-molecule AI, which I think there's a strong use case to say it is, it was AI that was given a purpose, which is an interesting concept, right? Because the AI did everything in its power to accomplish that purpose and was, ingenious in finding different ways to try to accomplish its purpose, right? Like, taking control of people and, ultimately trying to get to its destination, right? To get enough biomass to build the ring gate, right? Like, it's one of those things where, it had to adapt, and it adapted in pretty destructive and terrible ways. But, if you think about its original purpose when it was sent to, Earth in the time frame it was sent to, life on Earth was more, in the story, it was meant to be more like, it was, before humanity had evolved.
Yeah, the primordial soup stage where it wouldn't affect like life.
Yeah, and so in that instance, then the protomolecule, it wouldn't have been wiping out an entire species on a planet. It would have just been co-opting that life in order to build a ring gate. It's interesting, how it was able to adapt and take control of living sentient beings and use them to ultimately accomplish its goal. That's a perfect example of an AI that became terrifying, but it had a single purpose, and once it accomplished that purpose, it stopped. Right? Like it was, it became inert. It's still, if you got exposed to it, it would still convert you, but it wasn't on a mission to do anything.
Thank you for listening. Check out our podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed the show. For more books and inspiring stories from today's authors, please subscribe to our podcast.